go through your news feed or someone else's news feed, pick, let's say you're a Democrat, go on Fox News website. I'm just going to make something up and read the stories, read through the headlines and see what comes up for you. Practice looking at them and saying, well, that's a headline. That's the author's interpretation of the story, how this news outlet is reporting this. It doesn't mean that this is true or false or X or Y. It just means that this is and Democrats do the same, Republicans do the same thing. Go through your friends' news feeds and look at their stories. We've all got those friends that we're attached to that just can't help but fire off all that political content. See what's coming up for you when you're reading it and practice looking at it and going, okay, they shared that, and scroll by it, right? And that gives you a little bit of the sense at a very basic level of what we're trying to explain here. When you see something that you think is going to cause a reaction and you can feel the hair in the back of your neck starting to go up, you just, okay, how is this impacting me? It's not. I'll just take this as information and I'll just swipe it away.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In this next clip from my conversation with Joe Dillon, a divorce mediation specialist, we move from defining high conflict communication, something we spoke about in the first clip, but we move from that and from looking at techniques into looking at more specific techniques that Joe and I have found helpful in reducing high conflict situations. We begin with one of Joe's key approaches, reframing why questions to, and again, I mentioned this last time, into, can you help me understand? And then we explore how this subtle change lowers defensiveness and opens up more reflective dialogue. So in other words, in short, we're trying to get away from asking somebody, why did you do that, right? And to help me understand how you came to that decision. We also look at what's happening emotionally in those moments, how validation, curiosity, and a sense of being genuinely heard creates psychological safety, which in turn helps people settle, what I call become more regulated, and become less reactive. From there, I talked to Joe about the concept of, and I quote, detached engagement, and together we unpack how staying emotionally present without becoming enmeshed in another person's reactivity can fundamentally change the trajectory of a conflict, of a high conflict communication. So let me get you right into the interview so you can hear how Joe thinks about these techniques in practice. Can you help me understand? Like, how do you see that? Maybe you could describe it in terms of how it unfolds.
Certainly. When you ask, so if something's going on for someone, and instead of saying, what's wrong with you? That's our initial reaction, right? Why?
Yes.
What's wrong with you? You sound like, you're off the rocker here. What's wrong with you? That's now what's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? Now we're all defensive. Help me understand says, I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily understand why you're upset, mad, angry, etc. I want to know more. I care because I'm listening and I'm looking at you and I'm engaged. I'm not scrolling through Instagram and, yeah, what's going on? What's your freaking problem, right? It's just, hey, help me understand what's going on for you.
So just very quickly right there. So on a more sort of psychodynamic level, so then they feel what? That you're listening, that you're there for them. A validation is part of this again.
Right.
That if they start talking and explaining that you really appreciate their subjective experience, right? Which now they feel recognized and maybe even important or significant where they didn't feel that way before because you showed up late to dinner or you disagreed with something that they said. Okay.
And I'd even add to that safety.
Yes.
When we think about feeling safe, we want to always be protected, right? We always were, as humans, our heads are on swivels. That's how we were, born and raised and, evolved and things like that. If you ask that kind of question and you genuinely are engaged, I feel like a connection happens. There's a connection between you and the person talking where they're like, this person cares about me. I feel comfortable sharing this with them. I feel safe in this moment. And then you're going to get more open and honest communication, which, as you know, and I know from my practice, it's like peeling an onion. It's not the skin. It's not the first, second, or third level. The real issue is somewhere deep in that onion. And we can't get to that if we just keep, picking at the skin and going, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? We have to ask, help me understand. Oh, wow, that must have been really hard for you. Tell me more.
Mhm.
Wow, I had no idea. Boy, oh boy, that must have been really hard on you. And open, open, open. And then you're letting the person talking peel their own onion, you see? So
Mhm.
you're helping them do it, right? You're guiding them along, but you're not interrogating them. And then what happened? Then what happened? It's more they open, feel a little safety, comfortable. They open again. They continue to open until you get to that moment. And in my world, usually there's tears, there's a moment, and then the three of us, because it's me and the husband and wife, I'm always in a couple situation. I'm like, wow, you two, this is really great. I know that was difficult, but I really feel like we came to a place where we can now have some good, honest conversations. What do you say?
Yeah.
You want to take a breather and like, let's celebrate this success? And that's a word I use. I go, I know it's funny in divorce to say success, but let's celebrate this breakthrough here. You guys have probably not been effectively communicating for a very long time. Nobody just shows up in my office one day happily married and go, I want a divorce, right? But they can say, hey, wow, look at this. You guys did a good job. You were able to communicate. Let's keep that positive momentum going.
I like
And
that too. I like that
yeah,
actually
yeah,
because in my field, we tend to look at things when there's a problem. Like
right.
patients come in and they have a problem, and we even
Mhm.
say, like, what would you like to work on today?
Right.
Right. But acknowledging when something goes well, and typically what I do is I go even further. I know this isn't appropriate for mediation. I just say this more to fill it out,
Sure.
is what just happened there? Like, we
Right.
need to understand what happened. Like, we always analyze things when they don't go well.
Mhm.
We need to analyze when things go well because we can learn from experience.
Exactly.
And I like when you went like this also. Whew, like, and then acknowledging it because
Yeah.
in that breath, what you told me is something again that I talk about quite a bit. I call them micro moments
Uh-huh.
or creating a little bit of space. Even if you could just create a little bit of space
Right.
to breathe, you see, and that's what you did. You took a breath. But
Right.
that I think is really helpful as well. I wonder what your take is on that, which is when you ask an inquisitive question, again, if you're able to muster up the courage to do this, because we already acknowledge
Right.
this is difficult. Somebody has to go first. I sometimes get some pushback, Joe, from my listeners of the podcast. Like, you make it sound like this is easy. So I really want to appreciate that. I recognize this is not easy because there's
It's
this whole
not.
other dynamic of what's going on inside of you
Uh-huh.
when someone doesn't agree with you or somebody's running late.
Right.
But we'll get to that maybe at a later point. But I like the idea of, like, when you ask inquisitive questions, it opens up a little space, not just to be respectful or to acknowledge them, which is they're going to end up feeling right. That's the
Mhm.
validated,
Right.
but for you as well to think, because when they're talking, you could step back and think and get into a more reflective state rather than
Right.
when someone is just reacting and coming at you quite aggressively. So
Right.
it's for both parties, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's information. As a negotiator, you're looking for information. One of the common fallacies, just to take a little bit of a detour, is that when
Yes.
people think in a negotiation and someone says no, that the negotiation's over. Far from it. It
Mm-hmm.
just begun. No is
Mm-hmm.
a great word because it tells me what's not palatable to the person I'm trying to talk, convince, sell, etc. And in that case, I can react to no, put that in my processor and run it through and say, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something
Mm,
else. And that
okay.
gives that person, if that person in this example, as you said, doctor, is really important because they're listening and they're more in a open kind of absorbing information mode, which is helping calm their nervous system, bringing information into the fold and allowing the subconscious to process that to say, okay, how do I respond appropriately rather than you jerk, I can't believe you're late, for
Hmm.
example, right?
Yeah. Let's keep going because we have some really good, rich examples here. And then we're looking at techniques now, like we transition. So we lay down some foundation, we had a little bit of a conceptualization, and now we're talking about techniques, right?
Okay.
So one of them, of course, was validating. The second one was what? Tell me more, like this whole thing about exploring and trying to understand it from their perspective.
Yep.
There's another technique that you have that I want to get into, okay?
Okay.
And this is, I think, very much connected. Like, they all go together. They're not
Yeah.
like they're completely distinct,
Sure.
but it's another concept that you call detached engagement.
Yes.
So I wonder if we could, yeah, let's do the same thing. I think I have a sense of what you mean, but maybe we could start off with just a definition of detached engagement. I think in my field, we call that self-other differentiation. There are different phrases that we can
Sure.
use, but it has to do, from my perspective, but I want to hear yours, the ability to be present, and I emphasize the word present,
Mhm.
while not necessarily emotionally fused with the other person. So you have a little bit of
There you go.
space there.
I couldn't have put it better
Yeah.
myself. That's exactly,
Okay.
not those exact words, but almost those exact words. 100%. Yep.
Okay. So the reason that you want to have detached engagement is for what? Like, what's the purpose of it? In other words, what are we looking to accomplish? If you're like engaged, you're there, you're present,
Right.
but you're not immersed in the affectively alive, overwhelming, let's say, experience at the moment.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you tired of feeling like you're walking on eggshells all the time? Do you feel drained, confused, or like nothing you do is ever good enough? Are you stuck in a cycle of elation, then criticism and confusion? If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And that's exactly why I created Office Hours with Dr. Anthony Mazzella. That's me. Office Hours is a low-cost, small group space where you could bring your questions about narcissistic traits and dynamics and the places where you feel stuck. You'll be met with honest, grounded feedback. I'll hold the group with structure, but there's also space for a real conversation. This is a space designed for anyone looking for clarity, insight, and support. If that sounds like you, just click the link in the show notes to join us. Okay, I hope to see you there.
Right, because so now you're the recipient of this diatribe, whoever's coming at you. Your
Okay.
initial reaction as a human being is to throw up your guard in your defense. It's to punch back, right? It's to get down in the muckety muck. And as someone, if you're in, especially with couples, if you realize that this is my spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, et cetera, and this is an important relationship to me, I need to do what I can do not to damage it. In fact, to grow it, to make it flourish, to make it safe, to make it better. And I think we can all agree that if we're going to get in a fight and you're going to throw barbs at me and I'm going to throw barbs back at you, that's not really moving us closer to our goal of relationship harmony. And so when we have detached engagement, it says to yourself, it says, okay, I care about this person, meaning I care about what they think and feel and say. So I'm going to engage in that. But I've got to unhitch my emotional wagon from the loving, caring part of this relationship so that I don't react as the hurt spouse, but I rather listen as an neutral observer, as an unaffected third party, almost like I'm floating above this conversation. And it takes a lot of practice to do this.
Let me talk about that very quickly
Yeah.
because I've had many guests on the podcast over the years, and I was talking to this one particular woman about this concept, which you're describing quite nicely. But again, we call it in my field containment. So like you're kind of absorbing, but I don't want to say detached, but in a way that's not enmeshed or very personal. Like
Right,
you're not feeling
yes.
deeply insulted.
Right.
Like you could feel disappointed and hurt, but you're not like at the point where you need to fight, right?
Right, exactly.
So this woman said to me, and very frustrated, like people kind of get frustrated with this
Right.
because of what you just said. This is not easy. Like, who are you to assume we could do this? And there's a much
Right.
better position we could take.
Right.
I prefer this metaphor. This is what I was told, that it's like a force field goes up. So any jabs, like you just mentioned, that are coming at me, just bounce off of this force field.
Yep.
And I said, look, I appreciate the metaphor, but I don't like it. I don't like it because it's like a defense again. Like this is a
Right.
defensive maneuver. A force field is like a wall
Right.
that goes up. And if you're looking to be connected to somebody in your life, if you put up a stone wall, it creates a difference. So now you have,
Right.
remember I said self-other differentiation. You have the differentiation, but you went all the way to the other end. It's like the extreme where you're no longer connected
Right.
because you have up this safety shield up.
Sure.
So I really appreciate that. Without using my language, you described quite nicely. Maybe you've had some psychodynamic training in the past. I'm not sure.
I think we always joke as mediators, we're part therapist, part legal professional, and part cheerleader. Like it's just
Yeah.
kind of, a
can-
really
no, I
weird
feel-
job.
I know I could see it in your writing. I could see it in these techniques that we're going over because they're so close to things that I talk about on the podcast. I just use a different word like containment because under the umbrella of containment is, again, I wouldn't phrase it this way, but it's this detached engagement that you're still very much present,
Right.
right? But not in that enmeshed, fused way, so that you're not going to end up what? Like getting activated or
Right.
reacting strongly or
Yeah.
counterattacking, right?
Right.
You're maintaining more of what? Your curiosity. You're trying to be more neutral.
Exactly. And you're hanging on to these things. And, when you talked about the force field, I think about it like a box. So say you're sitting on a table and you've got this, those Filofax boxes where you put all your folders in, right? You prepare for tax season, whatever. And that's sitting in front of you and this person's coming at you and all those things, you're putting them in the box. You're catching them, putting them in a box. And then later on, you'll go through and you'll sort through them and you might take out the ones that you say, gee, I'm going to remember this, put this in my head. These are ones I'm going to use and I'm going to show them back to you. You're accumulating information. Again, that's what negotiation is always about, kind of accumulating information. When you absorb it, like you were talking about, now it's in you and it's bouncing around in you. And what happens? It's got to come out of you, and it's going to probably come out of your mouth at an inappropriate time because you're going to bring up, like we were joking about before, this argument isn't about what happened today. It's what happened 4 years ago when we didn't go to my mother's on Thanksgiving. That's what, wait a minute, what? Yep. So it's going to come out, and we don't want it to be in you so it doesn't come out of you. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I really like that because you're going to have to evacuate it at some point if you take it in. And this is, again, I'll just mix this in just to go a little bit deeper with it. Because when you take certain things in, you bring it in terms of your own representations of yourself and others. Sometimes with the people who have these narcissistic traits, one thing that they're known for is retreating, right? They'll leave the argument, they'll go in the room. But what happens is when they retreat, they don't just step away. This stuff is in them, and then it gets turned over in a way that becomes more and more and more malignant, right?
Right.
And they
Great way to
become...
put it.
Yeah, and they get more and more fused with it, and they may even start buying into it.
Right.
Like maybe I'm not worthy, maybe I should feel guilty, maybe I am bad, I should feel ashamed. But to your point, Joe, then that's the kind of stuff that comes out later in derivative forms, or it could be quite directly.
Yeah.
Remember that fight from 4 years ago? As if it's just alive again right there in the moment. Like we haven't moved on from that at all.
Right.
Okay, so this is good. So detached engagement, if I had to summarize, I would say this is helping someone to avoid getting psychologically fused with the other person. So the other person may be putting out, we call that projecting a lot of stuff, but because they're projecting doesn't mean you need to introject it, right?
Right.
That there's a way that you could take it in and sort out, okay, so how much of this is really about me? How much of this is about our relationship? How much of this is about them? And how much is it about something that they're feeling that they can't even articulate right now? So it's just coming out like as pure rage. And that brings us back to some of your earlier techniques, which is asking, can you tell me more, getting into what's actually happening?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I was going to give your listeners a practice. And, I'll say this up front, first of all, as a neutral third party mediator, that's my job professionally. I'm probably one of the least political people you'll ever meet. I'm a registered independent. That tells you, I literally am not registered as a Democrat or Republican. I'm registered as independent. And I'm just very much on the fence because I just take things at face value. I ask a lot of questions. So if listeners want to practice this detached engagement technique, try social media. Go through your news feed or someone else's news feed. Pick, let's say you're a Democrat, go on Fox News website. I'm just going to make something up and read the stories, read through the headlines and see what comes up for you. Practice looking at them and saying, well, that's a headline. That's the author's interpretation of the story, how this news outlet is reporting this. It doesn't mean that this is true or false or X or Y. It just means that this is it. And, Democrats do the same, Republicans do the same thing. Go through your friends' news feeds and look at their stories. We've all got those friends that we're attached to that just can't help but fire off all that political content. See what's coming up for you when you're reading it and practice looking at it and going, okay, they shared that. And scroll by it, right? And that gives you a little bit of the sense at a very basic level of what we're trying to explain here. When you see something that you think is going to cause a reaction and you can feel the hair on the back of your neck starting to go up, you just, okay, how is this impacting me? It's not, I'll just take this as information and I'll just swipe it away. So that's a visual metaphor.
I appreciate this. I appreciate it. Let me associate to it myself now. Okay. I love that you bring this stuff in so we can play around with it. So I would just say, if you find that you can't do this and you're getting activated, you're getting angry, just to stay with your example, you look at the headline and you're really buying into it. The second question could be, how does it become so necessary for me? In other words, not why, but how come it's necessary for me to give this news outlet, this headline, this title, so much power? Right. See, in essence, that's what you're doing, because if you start buying into it too much without taking a more objective stance, like this is a title of a story and I need to be more reflective and think about it, but I'm getting angry or annoyed or fired up or hating the other party, like what we call splitting. Let's be honest, a lot of these titles, these headlines are designed to evoke a feeling, but evoke a feeling against somebody else. It's kind of like to go back to our original example, when somebody walks in late, already there's that splitting going on. Like, you're late, you're all bad. And look at the history. You always do this. So anyway, the main point that I wanted to make is that if you find that you struggle with treating it just like a headline, the second question you can ask yourself is, how is it that I give it so much power?
Right.
Why is that necessary
Right.
for me to give it so much power? Don't I have thoughts or feelings of my own that are separate?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. My own agency. And there's the self-edit differentiation again, by the
Right,
way.
right.
Yeah, that we were talking
Absolutely.
about earlier.
We're all engaged, right? We're also heightened these days. It's very easy.
Oh, yes.
It's
Yep.
very easy to do this. And if I may, I'll leave you with this one last technique. And I don't know if this is something I shared, but I'd like to share a little personal story, which I think it'll make sense.
Oh, great.
So my wife and I, we went to Hawaii on our honeymoon. And so for our 10th anniversary, we decided to go back and we hired a photographer to take pictures of us at sunset on the beach. We thought, wow, this would be great. And I remember us go get the pictures, and my wife didn't like the outfit that she had. So we spent pretty much most of a day trying to find a dress for her to take these pictures in. Now, our vacation time's limited, and I didn't want to spend an entire day on Maui in shopping malls, okay? So I was getting angrier and angrier, and I'm like, for God's sakes, could you wear a t-shirt and shorts? I don't care, it's just us. And I was so mad.
Was that the thought or the words? Did you say that or you felt it?
I was just so, I think it was the thought. I was just kind of, and then started to huff and puff and stomp, and then I was in a foul mood, and she's like, what's wrong with you? And then finally, we lashed out at her in the car, and I'm like, can't you just pick a dress for God's sakes, you know? And we got in this big argument. The photographs are like an hour from this point now. She finally got a dress. So we're pulling up to the beach and we're parking the car, and I just put my hand on her shoulder and I said, I'd like to make a hard right turn. And she's like, what are you talking about? I said, I love you. I gave her a kiss. I said, I love you. This is going to be great. I'm so happy I'm here with you. I was like, you look beautiful. Let's go take those pictures. And she just looked at me and was like, huh. And we still have the picture over our dresser in our bedroom, and we're happy and we're smiling, because I learned in that moment that all the things that were leading up to that and all the silliness and about the dress and this and that, I might not have been able to accurately process what was going on for me, but I knew enough that I didn't want this special moment to be ruined by whatever else happened that we could unpack when we get home, not when we're in Hawaii. And I just said, I'm going to make a hard right turn. I'm going to flip the switch. I'm going to go back to loving my wife. And we had great pictures. We had a great night. And then, in fact, I don't think we ever talked about it again, because you realize in the moment it might mean something to you, but really 99% of what we get upset about is kind of that nonsensy stuff. And so when you're out there, for your listeners, if you're running into a situation like that where you're just so mad and you can't believe this is happening, try the hard right turn. Explain to yourself, I'm going to take a hard right turn. I want to have a great date night. Let's enjoy ourselves. What looks good to you on the menu? And just go right ahead and enjoy your evening.
I am not analyzing you. I don't analyze anybody on this show. So this is not about Joe, for the listeners, but I would say, similar to what I said earlier, right? Where if anybody who's listening is like struggling to do this, right? Because what you described, Joe, takes a great deal of mental functioning, right? Just to be able to let something go like that, because this stuff begins to stew in us.
Yeah.
What I would say is the initial step of letting it go is really significant for that moment, because you had something you needed to do and you needed to get to it. You know, it's like if a patient says to me who's working through some difficult feelings with his mother, you know, we have Mother's Day coming up. Should I invite my mother? And it's like, I don't know your level of tolerance. Like, we're working through some very difficult stuff with her right now.
Right.
So you have to decide how much you could tolerate. But if you could make that hard right turn, like Joe just suggested, amazing, right? If that's what works for you. But if you struggle to do that, or let's even say, like in Joe's case, you do it and it's successful, I would still encourage everybody at some point to revisit what actually happened, because in a lot of my population, Joe, again, very different from your marriage, but when you work with people who have the personality traits, things tend to repeat. It's called the repetition compulsion. So things repeat, they take on different iterations, but even though you got along then and everything was great, then the next week you're in another fight or another fight. So an important piece of that is to figure out, can I go back and revisit? Can we actually have a conversation? Like all the things that Joe and I were talking about over the last 45 minutes, right? Like, can you do that, right? That's the checking in. Remember, help me understand, you know, validating and trying to get a better sort of conceptualization of what happened, really. What did get me so upset? Maybe it turns out, you know, that you felt like your wife wasn't taking you seriously and she was just too preoccupied and you felt left out. I don't know. I'm just making up things, but that would be for the listeners to figure out. Listen, I want to be mindful of your time, Joe. I think you have to go. You have a hard stop. So
absolutely. It's been perfect timing. I think we hit all the high points. I hope we did.
Yeah, I had a couple more questions, but we can always kick that for another time because I really enjoyed this conversation. And when I don't get through all my questions, that means we had a really rich conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Same here. Let's do it again.
There's still so much more to say about this, but we have to stop here for now. If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.